and I am the host for the day at this venue. I'm going to, quick reminder to everybody, please put your phones on silent during the session. And we will be projecting a QR code later, 15 minutes before the session ends, for you guys to key in your questions, which we will then have shared with the panel. There is also a QR code at the back of your agendas for feedback on the session, if you would take 5 minutes after the session is over. All right, continuing on the conversation on AI, we have 5 amazing panelists to talk about adopting AI for social good, the challenges and opportunities. This panel is co-hosted by Purpose and will be moderated by Mandira, Kalra, Kalaan, who is Senior Campaign Director and Head of Office India at Purpose, where she is responsible for Purpose's strategy, impact, and growth in India. She brings almost 20 years of experience working at the intersection of communication and social impact and believes in the importance of creative storytelling to drive systemic and normative change. Joining her on the panel, we have Dr. Sarayu Natarajan, founder of Arpita Institute, Alpan Raval, Chief Scientist AI ML at the Wadhwani Institute for Artificial Intelligence, Apar Gupta, co-founder of the Internet Freedom Foundation, Arpita Kanjilal, manager at Digital Empowerment Foundation. I will now hand over to Mandira to introduce the panel and kick it off. Can we have the mics working?
Hello? Yes, it is.
Great.
Thank you so much, Shelley, and good afternoon and welcome to this panel on adopting AI for social good. Shelley has done the honors and introduced the panel for me, which is wonderful. So I'm going to kick us off and just set some context. I think there is often a moment in human history, and if you look back over the last 50 years, there have been many moments where suddenly technology feels like it's progressing at breathtaking and breathneck speed, and the rest of us need to figure out how to keep up. For someone like me, who is a layperson on AI, the current narratives and conversations around the inevitability of AI feels like that, but it also feels eerily similar to what we've heard when Windows, email, the internet all came around. And for all its potential, AI feels like it has a bit of an image problem. Across the globe, views are very evenly split on whether it will help or harm. Interestingly, in countries which are at the forefront of developing AI, the split is more positive. And amongst those who have experienced some sort of discrimination, it tends to be more towards harm. And yet we all know that technological innovation has changed our lives. It's changed how we do business, it's changed education, access to information, news, and of course communication. And it's had significant impacts on the social sector. Social media, just from a communication, I'm a communication person, and just from a communication perspective, if you look at, starting with community radio all the way down to chatbots, with IVRS and, apps and various kinds of technological innovations thrown in the middle, the social sector has been right there on the front lines of adopting technology and using technology to do our work. And this is not even talking about very specific digital technologies for specific issues or sectors. Across the global south, we hear of digital solutions in low resource environments. And there's no reason that AI won't be similar. But it feels that somehow this new adoption, this new pace is a bit different. It feels that understanding what's happening, there are differences. There are differences in how this is being adopted across different audiences, different communities. And we all know that to effectively develop and adopt technological innovation for social good, we have to understand who our target audience is, what our target impact is, and so our users, so that our AI solutions are relevant to their contexts. Access alone is just not enough. And in an Indian context, access actually comes with a whole range of issues: who has access, who controls it, and how that actually exacerbates existing inequalities. And so I want to use today to talk a little bit with this panel who knows a lot more about this issue than I do, of thinking through how we can align the adoption of AI, these new products, these new technologies, these new services to those who we want to impact the most. We often talk about individual user experiences, but we know that actually at a community level, a user journey may be in a household, and devices and journeys are shared, information is shared. What does that mean for privacy? What does that mean for informed consent? Who develops, with whose information, who uses, who benefits, are all questions that I think we need to answer to ensure that AI is equitable and inclusive. So for today's discussion, I'm hoping that we're taking a bit of a system-centric approach. We're going to focus on multiple perspectives, not just users, but across the ecosystem, how things may change based on context, cultural sensitivities, language, gender, and all the other intersections. What are the partnerships? What are the platforms to ensure that solutions reduce risk rather than increase it? And what are the accelerators for adoption that can be deployed? Who are the audiences who are not being leveraged or we're missing out? And how can we all play a key role in this transition? To kick us off, I'm going to come to the side of the panel first. Sarayu and Alpan, I was wondering if we could start. We know that AI comes with a complexity and scale that may not have been possible before. Previous technologies may not have had that same complexity and scale. Could you talk us through maybe your perspectives on what is the big deal? Why is AI so different? What is new and different about AI than earlier technologies?
Can you hear me at the back? Yeah. So what's different about AI relative to what we've seen in the past is this very sensitive, in ways amazing, in ways brittle, in ways scary, but very sensitive dependence on data. Right? This is the only technology we have that is so data dependent. It's not just dependent on the data that's used to train these models, or training is really, sort of giving intelligence to the AI, but it's also very dependent on the data that comes in when the models are being used. And this is what makes the technology so brittle, but in areas where it works well, it works so much better than anything else that it causes a revolution. So it's the data aspect of this technology, in my view, that makes it unique, coupled with the fact that we now live in a very data-rich world because of the excessive digitization that's taking place across the board, right? Everything is digital. Everything I say here is going to be converted to a transcript, maybe automatically. Your reactions may go on social media. Everything's digitized, everything's available. Data is ubiquitous, right? So this combination of the availability of data, of the reach of data, with a technology like AI and with the massive computing power we have to make sense of the data in certain ways. I don't say we always make sense of it. Sometimes we make nonsense of it. But to process the data, essentially. That's what really makes it unique and sort of leads to outsized impact, I think, in certain situations. Leads to outsized negative impact in the situations where it's not supposed to be used.
Thank you. Hello. Yeah. Thank you. Just to add to the things that Alpan said, I think it's this potential, the reliance on data and its ability, the ability of the technology to therefore achieve outsized impact. And AI very often is imagined as one technological or one flow of logic or a certain very specific kind of artifact. But the reality is there are very many kinds of technologies which can all be classed as AI. So there is technology that is broadly within the realm of automation, which may have which may be called as AI. There are algorithms that have the capability to learn from existing data sets or from the data that is generated through the running of the algorithm itself, which might also be classed as AI. And increasingly, I think one of the popular forms of AI that we see is, of course, generative AI, which is a very specific type of algorithm within the larger ambit of algorithms. So, I mean, that's AI. And in being able to process data and learn as it goes along, this technology possesses immense potential to have very significant impact. And with the democratization of access to compute capability, analytical capability, even data sets, though I have some concerns about that, AI has the potential to have very real impact. What is exceptional about this time, to go to the question, I think, of course, the nature of AI itself is that it's very different than what we traditionally understand as technological artifacts. So there's the reliance on data, the ability to continue to learn and inform itself. And of course, with the increased availability of atomized data, or what social scientists like to call data exhaust, you have the ability to build all kinds of technologies. There are a couple of other factors which are social ones that drive the exceptional nature of our times. One is, of course, the fact that much of this data is held, and the capability to analyze by corporations. So there are a few companies that have the capability to compute and process the data, and also hold vast troves of data. So that's one. It's not a universal truth in all circumstances, but that is one truth in this sector, so to speak. Second is, we live in a context of a receding state. The state is increasingly stepping back in very many ways away from public functions. So the state is not as present, though of course, some might argue that that is perhaps for the good, but there is a context of a receding state, an increasingly neoliberal state that is stepping back in very many domains all across the world. And then, of course, the nature of the technology, besides its reliance on data and its ability, is the fact that it dramatically reduces the costs of very many things that were costly previously. And you started with communications technology. What modern communication technology has done is that it's reduced the cost of disseminating and communicating close to zero. With the potential of generative AI, the cost of generating the content, which in the past somebody would have had to write, is also zero. And so there are literally no frictions, no pause that is inbuilt in the system that will allow some kind of restraint or control, or some kind of balances within the system itself. So we live in exceptional times, I think. Though even the argument around exceptionalism has its limitations, because I believe that human rights and some of these fundamental values are universal, but of course we can come back to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Alpan, Sarayu. I wanted to come now, Arpita, and taking from the points that they've made and the exceptionalism, but actually bringing it down to what does that mean in the context of the diversity, and taking from, I think, your last point, the diversity we live in, and what does that diversity mean also for something that is so heavily dependent on data?
Yes, I think in line with what Alpan sir and Sarayu mentioned, see, data from our traditional understanding has been numbers, right, in our imagination. But now, when we see this heavy reliance on data, it's people, it's communities. So in a country with 1.4 billion people, India is caste-based largely, has so many genders, so many expressions, so many religions, so many different demographies and geographies. How do we, at the level of design thinking, integrate subjectivity as an aspect to developing AI applications? And if we don't address this question, then we will just, people will then turn into bots and binary code. So we are then reduced to 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1. So coming from Digital Empowerment Foundation, I'm coming from a place of a researcher who studies the relationship between technology and society. So there, if you look at data again, because there's heavy reliance of data, there's a need for a massive labor force. On one hand, we are talking about job displacement. On one hand, it's also creating a workforce. But the kind of workforce it's creating and the kind of setup required to sustain the workforce is huge, massive. It's reshaping the future of work. We are seeing the rise of gig and platform economy, where workers are not getting the entitlements because they are outside the traditional relationship of an employer and an employee. So there are a lot of these interconnected questions when we talk about any technology, including AI. Of course, like Alpan sir said, the unique aspect is the heavy reliance on data, and we have to figure ways to make it more humane, just, and ethical. The other is also, so one is that we talk about what goes in the process of developing data systems and how do we ensure that data points are created representing different diverse communities in India. The other is who are the people developing these practices, applications. Like, let's take the example of this panel itself. 3 women on this panel will give a unique perspective to technology coming from through gender lens. So similar question I think applies to that aspect where who are practitioners? Are we ensuring diversity in the development process of this practitioner? So I'll stop here for the time being and then.
Thank you, Arpita. And I'd love to come back to your point on the changing future of work later in the panel. I'm sure everybody has a viewpoint. But I wanted to come to you. I think a lot of what I'm hearing is also about balance, right? Balance in our engagement with AI, balancing the speed with which it's being rolled out with safeguards, balancing adoption with accountability. And so could you talk a little bit about, in the context of AI in general, what are some of the benefits? I think we're hearing some of the benefits, but what are some of the risks? What does it do in terms of transparency? What does it do in terms of accountability? What does that look like for AI?
So conceptually, at a framework level, the broader technology adoption is almost proportional to the amount of change it may impact on the basis of what it's interacting with. So there'll be a large amount of change which will be noticed in terms of existing social relationships, in terms of shifts of power, where people who have it will have greater, and those who do not have it will in fact lose some bits of it. So, for instance, if you look at the labor market today, and it's not only prompted out of liberalization in which there is a breaking of the union culture. There is a shift away from, these are conscious choices we've made as an economy, from a safety of contract to at-will contract. But now, when you put technology on top of that, what you also start noticing are elements of what is called platformization. Now again, as a society, we made conscious choices in which we argue that there are certain integers of efficiency, customer service which result from it. But I'm also reminded just about 10 days ago when I was walking past this Saket market, PVR Anupam, for those who are in Delhi, there were about 6 gig workers who were sitting there, and one of them rolled up their pant and was showing an injury which was caused to him. And this is representative of what Sarayu also brought up, was a lot of the offloading of the parking, the safety, etc., which results from that technological and that economic choice we consciously as a society have made. Now when you place AI on top of that, and there are existing documented studies which demonstrate it, and again you look for the efficiency principle of a warehouse clearing out, not through robots, but through human beings, about 100 parcels through a recursive muscular function. And then by that being linked to pay entitlements, then there will be certain muscular injuries which will result to the workforce in that warehouse, right? And if you do want to replace it with robots again, because robots don't ask for a raise, they don't negotiate the contract, you are viewing labor as a cost in a country where there is massive unemployment. These are conscious choices we are making as a society, which is why I think there are ways we need to think about artificial intelligence, maybe as skill replacement, but also as intelligence augmentation. And there's a good framework on this, which is given in Frank Pascal's book, which is called The New Laws of Robotics, which picks up from Asimov's existing laws on robotics, which is a piece of science fiction. But what do we need as a society from AI will be decided by us, and that needs to be a conscious choice. And I hope to get into that a little later in terms of what it means in terms of policy frameworks, or what it means in terms of other areas where we as a society are looking at AI as a piece of the larger tech for good.
Thank you, Apar. I'm actually going to take what you said and bring it around this way to Alpan. Alpan, I know you're working extensively in health, education, agriculture, and you are using AI in all of those sectors. Taking from these conversations around equitability, inclusiveness, job creation, but also job loss, can you talk a little bit about your experiences in those sectors and what you've seen in terms of how AI can be either beneficial or accessible?
Yeah, so I think, I have a somewhat positive view of things because I think there's a whole class of society that doesn't see the benefits of technology. And these are not the people in this room. It's really people at the bottom of the pyramid who haven't been exposed to technology. And the question that is interesting for us, I represent Wadhwani AI. What we do is we develop AI solutions for people at the bottom of the pyramid. We work in healthcare, education, and agriculture at the moment. But what is interesting for us is to see how things evolve when these people are exposed to these new technologies and how they become equal participants in the development of these new technologies. I mean, one example that I give quite often is, one of the things that we work on is an app to weigh babies using visual information. So we take a video of the baby in their rural home setting, and the AI model in the back end outputs the weight of the baby, and we've got it down to good accuracy. It's very robust. We've tested it in a number of areas. We are piloting it as we speak, and it's working very well. But in initial versions of this app, we tested it in the field with mothers. And we said, look, we've got this app. All you have to do is take a short video using a smartphone of your baby, and it tells you the weight. And we expected them to say, isn't this amazing? But that's not what they said. They said, obviously, it tells you the weight if you take a video. But their real question was, where do you store this video of my baby? Where does it go? Right? So there's a huge privacy concern, and then we had to go back and try and address that in various ways. But so there are these concerns that are coming up from the ground that we can't even anticipate as of now. There are some obvious privacy concerns that may come up, but we don't even know the issues that will come up. We know the issues that are of significance to people like us who browse the internet, who look at, who interact with AI on a daily basis through the internet. But we don't know the issues that are going to come up from the ground. So I would say, I think some of these things will organically surface as we see AI play out on the field. I do agree that there needs to be more control and regulation at a certain level, but it shouldn't be at the cost of benefits that can accrue on the ground through use of these technologies. So I think we have to be very careful in how we do this. We can't live in echo chambers where we're only talking to people like us, getting feedback from people like us about AI, and then nodding to each other, yeah, this makes sense. But it may not make sense to 99% of India.
Thank you, Alpan. And Alpan, I'm going to come back to you on the policy piece, but before I do, I wanted to actually open it up to both you, Arpita and Sarayu. I'm hearing, and I know we said earlier about changing the nature of work. I'm hearing, can AI be a tool of economic empowerment? And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit from your own experiences of what your experience is AI in the workplace as a tool for empowerment or not could be, and to both of you.
Thank you. The intersection of AI with work, and I know we had some conversation even before we started this, about thinking about AI and work, just stepping back, there are multiple intersections. There is, of course, what we hear about AI replacing workers in the context of automation. This can be in retail, this can be in several other atomizable, discrete functions which are often performed by humans. So there's one intersection of AI and work there. Then there is the other, which is the AI mediating access to work, which is what you see on job matching platforms. So when you reserve a cab on an app, very often there is a digital artifact that governs which cab you get, how soon it comes, where it comes from, etc. So there is that intersection of AI and work as well. The third, of course, which is much more seen in white-collar professions, is the use of AI. The surveillance happens in algorithmically mediated work as well, but it happens in white-collar professions as well, where AI is used as a tool to surveil and ensure that there is productivity. So that's another interaction of work. There's a fourth, which I think is tragically invisible, which is that a good amount of AI is based on data, which is labeled and annotated by humans. Very often, that is work as well. And it is one of those domains of work which is invisibilized in multiple ways, in part because it is done by women, done in remote rural areas, because this is work that can be done in very many instances. Of course, it's a spectrum and we can all understand that, but it is often done in remote rural areas by women, not in workplaces, and so that is another domain of work to consider, because a good proportion of this kind of annotation and labeling work is actually content moderation. And if you think back about the use of AI for content moderation, ultimately it's built on the backs of humans watching ghastly videos, typically, and then annotating them as harmful, perhaps in accordance with community guidelines on various platforms, etc. So that's another domain of work to think about in the context of AI. So I don't know if I answered your question, but what I hope to do is shed light on the different intersections of the notion of work with the AI technology that we talk about and see.
No, thank you. That is very helpful. And I think yours is a different perspective, and I'd love, Arpita, to you talk about your perspective.
Yes, so I can think of few examples to arrive at my point. One, we could take the example of Narega workers, right? So AI, again, heavy reliance on data. So let's take the case of Narega workers. Like, they do not get their salaries unless their attendance is marked through a biometric system. Now that's data. And we see that many times because of the gaps, they don't receive the salary. So, despite working. So that is one example I have in mind. For a technology interface for work. And well, it comes in the form of providing services. It can be a tool of service provision, but can become a tool of exclusion. So AI can potentially deepen that conflict. Then second, I could take example of, say, road safety. I read about an AI application which enhances road safety using drones, surveillance cameras, and very critical micro-level monitoring. And at the same time, the question of privacy comes in, the question of infringement of space comes in, and we have so many conversations about how to make it more friendly to the conversation about privacy. So that's another example. So how do we see technology going forward, taking these two sides to the story? Three, DF is basically studying and creating a blueprint for economic diversification in coal-dependent districts of Jharkhand, right? So there, what we are trying to see is how digital can become means for generating employment, right? And a stark example and a conflicting example, example and an observation and a learning is that it seems for developing a LLM model, it requires energy equivalent to a flight taking the round of a globe 365 days. So that's the amount of energy that's going in, right? So, and that's affecting climate. So at DEF, we are trying to address climate and environment sustainability through technology. And at the same time, it's throwing us that question also, that what are you advocating for? So to arrive at what you said, so when we talk about work, future of work, traditional employment or not, these are the conflicts and contradictions we face, and I think we can just keep on taking examples to take it, so I will stop here for now.
Thank you. But I'm going to come back, and I'm coming to you because I know you mentioned that there are policy frameworks? What are the requirements we need to consider for this inclusive AI deployment, especially when from a social good point of view or an equitable point of view? So can I ask you to talk a little bit about that and what those frameworks could potentially look like? And what are the challenges to implementing those frameworks?
So I think policy frameworks have been alive to the mind of the Indian government even before ChatGPT released its model publicly, which started a much more public recognition as to what generative AI was capable of doing. And this was principally through the Niti Aayog coming out with the AI for all framework, and then with a specific report subsequent to it, which focused on agriculture. Now, when you look at the reports by itself, one can look at the positives, which is the framing in which it is recognized that AI needs to be something which is democratically participative. It needs to be there for everyone. But when you look at the report a little much more in terms of its principle and whether it's matching with actual policy deployments or if there's an enforcement capacity, that is lacking. And also subsequent to the specific sector-based report on agriculture, I think it's not been followed up with other industry sectors where relevant applications are being developed, such as medicine and life sciences. So I think what we need in terms of thinking about policy frameworks, and I advocate for this as a person who believes in AI, uses generative AI widely, okay, is that we need to think if technology is so central to our economic and social development, is that most national economic surveys, which has preceded the budget, the union budget, have started having some comment about technology. I think it needs to be a dedicated, recurrent chapter as to technology capacity, including artificial intelligence in public services, how it's being used, how it's being conceptualized, or even start thinking through that our systems of governance persistent, rigorous in studying technology, possibly even an independent national technology survey. The union ministry which looks at it is called the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, which grew out of the Electronics Commission, which was basically to make sure that India could have supercomputers so we could forecast weather patterns and also have the nuclear energy or nuclear bombs. Okay, it still was a child ministry which was attached first to the PMO and then to the Ministry of Telecom and Communications. Its budgetary allocations has only increased over the past 3 years, but if you go to the website, you notice that there are about 18 to 24 departments, including the NIC, which runs the government servers and all the services, right? And bulk of the money is going there. So we need to resource for it properly. We need to have enough people. The government needs to build capacity to study it on a recurring level. And I think there's a good amount of participation which needs to be encouraged at the state level itself, but that's a little later. What I think is that what we are missing right now is being driven a little bit too much by the ways of thinking around neoliberalization, the ecosystem approach. The private sector will build it out. The government needs to be only enabling, to think about it a little differently. Because as you just made that example, for instance, right, about Narega workers, there are also different AI deployments happening in much more sensitive areas, which are starting. For instance, the Delhi government wants to use the cameras which were installed for safety of children towards being facial recognition, which is a form of vision recognition, which is a form of AI, to enforce attendance. So it's becoming coercive now. And one of the principals in that news story is on record saying that this is not a good thing. Now, similarly, I can go into policing, but that will be a little much more controversial. But that technology is being used in courts to show to judges that there is an objective basis to us arresting this person on the basis of the color of the t-shirt they were wearing. And that person gets bailed subsequently and all the evidence falls flat. So I'm saying that we need to think this through a little bit carefully. There is a massive potential to benefit us economically, socially, but again, augmentation of what we want, replacement possibly of what we do not want to do, and only use it in areas where we know that it can be used safely.
Sarayu, did you want to add? I could hear you agreeing with Apar.
I usually agree with Apar, so that makes things easier. But just a couple of notes, additive to what Apar has already said. I think one is that, to the broader point of thinking about what are we deploying technology for, to unpack that while there's a capability of the digital artifact, the mathematics that underlies it, etc., there is a whole layer of human decision making that sits around it. And I'll give you a very, very simple example. We do a lot of work on the gig economy, particularly ride hail and personal services, but in the gig economy, a driver, once they've done for the day, they can choose to go to home. So you can click a button and then it'll assign you rides within 5 kilometers. Now, somewhere in the US, I don't know, like deep in the Midwest, Phoenix, 5 kilometers is 5 kilometers, always takes 5 minutes by and large. Whereas in Bangalore, 5 kilometers can mean anything from 5 to 50 to God knows more. So transporting the decision to encode 5 kilometers as the radius around which you would be assigned tasks is a human one. It is not necessarily one that came from the algorithm. So one is to ensure that we are always thinking about what capabilities lie in organizational, state, personal choices with respect to the codification of AI is one part of it. The second one, I think, again, this is an area I'm trying to understand a little bit more, is the notion of value from expectations from AI technology. We spend a lot of time thinking about whether the AI is doing the purpose, but does that purpose match societal expectations, and how can we get better at gleaning and understanding what society expects or needs from a technology? And I think that question, we need to get better at thinking about what that means, how to answer it, how can the process of understanding expectations be one that is truly democratic, inclusive, etc. And these are all human questions, to my mind. They're not technological ones. But I'll pause.
No, thank you. Alpan, I'm going to come to you, I think, and to bring it back to the idea of social good a little bit. I think, and also in the context of Charcha, there are many of us here today and through the yesterday and tomorrow from civil society organizations, from grassroots movements, from this sector. And I was wondering what you saw as maybe the role of the sector and how that almost works in partnership or at cross purposes, or can input effectively into how policy and practice for AI actually gets rolled out.
So you mean the social sector, how?
The social sector, yes.
Yeah, so I think, I gave one example of how we get inputs from the ground. But I'd also, before going there, I'd like to, there was a very interesting discussion prior to this on sort of the negative effects of AI and what we need to watch out for. And I agree with all of it, but I also want to say that we tend to lump a lot of issues together. So some are pure data issues. So for example, if people's attendance is not being logged properly, that means there's a bug in the data collection system. And if you put AI on top of that without addressing the bug, it's only going to amplify the data issues and make them worse, right? So you have to address the issues where they are. There are some cases where there are use case issues. There's, surveilling people and taking pictures of people's faces is just not the right use case. And you can pretty much take any technology and apply it to the wrong thing. So I don't think you should single out the technology itself. So I think there are all these, as Sarayu mentioned, there are all these human issues around AI that we need to solve. There are some technology issues, some human issues that lie within the periphery of AI that we need to address and make sure that we have robust systems on which you put, that AI should be put on top of robust platforms, right? And you need to test those platforms well before you deploy AI. Now, coming back to your question about how, how society can inform what we do, I think it's a very dynamic and evolving situation. I don't think we've yet seen AI play out in the social impact situation in a country like India yet. I think it's the very beginning. I Someone said it's very hard to predict the future, which, which sounds obvious, but it is true. I think the technology is changing so rapidly that literally anything that I say about what's going to happen now is going to be untrue 3 months from now, right? Because it is really evolving. Not only is the technology evolving rapidly, the way humans interact with the technology is evolving very rapidly. So, as I said before, we don't yet know what to expect. And we're seeing this in a number of our use cases. We're deploying AI, for example, to help healthcare workers on the ground with giving advice to patients. We're deploying similar LLM type AI for agricultural workers. We're developing predictive models to predict whether a TB patient will complete their treatment in advance, right? And so that these patients can then be targeted. Now, these things are just coming to the fore. They're getting deployed. We don't know how patients are going to react to this, how people on the ground are going to react. And I think it's very important that we have observability, that we really evaluate in terms of human responses to AI. And I think you would be very surprised. So I'd just like to say that.
No, thank you. Arpita, did you want to come in as well?
Yes, I absolutely agree with Alpan sir that technology should not be seen in isolation, and that is the appeal, I think, coming from the social sector approach, that anything, any design, any methodology, any framework that we think of at the design level has to have an overall comprehensive understanding, while the aim is to build universal systems catering to larger questions in technological advancements, but also factor in nuances, subjectivities, could be any kind of intersections that we are talking about.
I don't think you can just take a generic model that's built in the West, like a ChatGPT,
Yes.
and just deploy it in India without being sensitive to the context.
Yes, so that's one. And the second is that whether it is B2B model or B2G2C or B2C, any which way it has to go to C. And C is not just consumer, but they're also citizens. So we have to have a citizen-centric approach, whether it's technology for profit, for good, for non-profit, semi-commercial, commercial, can be in the spectrum of things. But generally that approach is very important, is what I think is the...
Thank you so much. I had some more questions, but I also realized we're getting lots of questions from the audience. And so I'd actually like to defer my questions and bring up some of the ones that are coming in. There is a QR code, so please do share your questions. And we have about 20 minutes, so we can use the time. How can we ensure that access to AI and associated technology solutions does not further aggravate the gap between the haves and the haves not? And I think touched upon some of that, but I don't know who'd like to take that. Would you like to take that?
Yeah, I think, so there's obviously a technology gap between the haves and the have-nots. I do think that today access to AI is increasing this gap just because of, and again, it all comes down to data. I don't think we are efficiently using data that's generated on the ground at scale. We're using a very small sliver of data to develop the AI that we do develop, and that's from people like you and me, data that's gathered from people like you and me. And so the AI that we use preferentially benefits people like you and me, right? So we really need to, I think again, fundamentally we need to change the data equation. Where is the data coming from to build some of these models? Is it representative data? Is it truly representative? And then are the models truly representative and localized appropriately? And I think when we get there is when you will see the gap reducing. But I'm afraid until then, it's not looking good.
Thank you, Alpan. Did anybody else want to add? We can go to the next question, which is, as government is the key to policy making, how can we ensure all apprehensions and advocacy are heard and acted on at the right moment? Do you want to take that apart?
I don't want to shock you guys. So most of my work has been advocacy. It's been, for about 6 years, I ran an organization which it was not research, it was a pure play advocacy organization. And the way we went about our interventions was essentially improving the transparency around government actions by using the RTI process, working with larger coalitions, because when you work on a siloed urban topic such as technology and the impact of it, and it continues to spread, you need to, for instance, if you're working around health, you need to talk to organizations and movements who are working on health. Okay, if you're trying to talk around, let's say, a COVID vaccination platform, which is in English, is using only a mobile phone for registration, and you want to craft an intervention while a court is hearing it, you need to talk to the people who are the sector experts. So I think that's one way of doing it. The other way is through transparency. If you're working on something, I think bureaucrats respect you when they know where your money is coming from, because that's always at the back of their mind, that kahan se paisa aa raha hai? Okay, so IFF always disclosed where it got its money from. It had a clear charter. It didn't do pay for play, and its money was Indian. So when your money is Indian, completely Indian, what you can do is you can go to court and challenge the Home Ministry, which you have done, okay, when they don't listen to you. And when the government does something good, you can send them a congratulatory letter and also try to talk to them, which we do as well. So over a period of time, what happens, at least with the people who are focused purely on the governance, they understand that you are a special organism. Okay, you're just, for some weird purpose, focused on an ideological charter or your mission, vision, values, okay? And you're just going to care about that. So I think that's an effective way to take forward advocacy, even on issues like AI. But I would like to end this by saying that the number of organizations around advocacy in India on technology are less than what they were 10 years ago, compared to the amount of internet connections which have grown by multiples of 10. Okay, and that speaks to the funding climate, which is why I think organizations are very important, which are working on other areas like health, gender, education, to also have siloed verticals within their organizations on thematic areas, to have researchers, advocacy professionals who work only on technology. I think it's very important for technology to be an integral part of issue-focused organizations.
Just adding, so just to set the context that in line with Apar, that India is very proud of its adoption of technologies generally, and rightly so. Like there are a lot of emerging technologies, and India is adopting them at a large scale. And if you see the number of smartphone users, if you see the internet penetration, if you see number of like the scale of user engagement has multiplied. But that has not translated into the socio-economic landscape or the economy of rural India especially, which is 70% of India's population. They are the majority when you're talking about Indian economy. So I'm losing the chain of thought here, but basically what I was trying to say is, can you repeat the question? Oh, the government, the role of government, yeah. So here, so when you talk about providing digital services, there are common service centers that the government has set up and has set up across the country in remote areas. And they are also reaching out through the National Institute of Rural Development, etc. But again, it's still a challenge. We don't have the adequate infrastructure to accommodate the needs, diverse needs, tailored needs of different kinds of communities and different demographies with very different needs. There's internet in some, there is no internet in some places. Then there's some internet but unstable. There's internet but no access to tools. There's access to tools but no literacy. But access to literacy but don't know how to connect it to improve their socioeconomic situation. So the gaps are at various levels. So when we talk about government doing efforts, of course they are doing efforts at certain level, but like Apar said, I think community-based organizations, organizations who are locally rooted in specific socio-cultural economic context can be important stakeholders in delivering this and enhancing internet connectivity. So, and of course, AI adoption. So just one part that I think other than service, other than thinking in terms of providing services, we should also think about ending information poverty, be it about AI, be it about any technology. We need to, like AI seems so big. I mean, somehow, like it's like, oh, it's AI. What is AI in simple language? How do we translate it to normal citizens in one line? I think that is a challenge even for experts in the field. How do we make it simple for everyone and make it accessible? Sorry for the, yeah.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add, I absolutely agree on the point on information poverty and enabling and supporting grievance redressal in the context of technology. But the other one was a few weeks ago, I was in a conversation where there was the METI secretary on stage, and one of the questions that came from the audience was whether in the comments that METI receives, there is a gender lens, right? That was the broad question that was posed to him. And the response was striking, which is that no. We usually receive responses to policy documents that we put out from a few set of organizations, some researchers, the big tech companies, and a few other firms. Very rarely is it more diverse. And this was, of course, a specific conversation about gender, but that I guess is, to Apar's point about the need to participate in the public process. And of course, there's a larger conversation to have on whether public consultation is broken or it's a fractured system. But setting that aside, more actively engaging and participating in the avenues that are already available is quite significant.
Thank you. Maybe one or two more questions. So this is interesting. How relevant is building the trust of users and citizens in AI? And what could potential means to do that look like?
100% relevant. It's, without that, you can't deploy or scale AI successfully. And by successfully, I don't mean making a lot of money, but even for making a lot of money, it's important. But if you actually want to do good through AI, this is absolutely vital. You have to build trust. You have to make sure the decisions that the AI takes make sense. And one way to do it is something that, that was earlier called human in the loop. I think now it's more appropriate to say human in command, because really you want the human to be making the decisions and the AI to be a tool that serves the human in decision making rather than being at the center of things. So yeah, it's absolutely important that you have human in the loop, that you understand the beneficiaries, and that you build for the beneficiaries and not for someone else.
Can I push you a little bit on that question,
Sure.
actually? And completely agree, it's human in the loop or human in command. But also, how do we then also differentiate power differentials between different humans? For instance, in the work you do and the experience you've had with on-ground beneficiaries, as you said, how do we ensure that that perspective is built into design thinking? Are there mechanisms?
Yeah, so that depends on the use case. So if it's a health use case, then the human has to be the expert. It can't be the beneficiary. So the patient can't decide that, this is what's abnormal about my X-ray. It has to be the doctor. But it depends on the situation, really. So for example, in a situation where you might use a chat agent to educate someone on the ground, then that person should have agency directly. But so it'll really vary by use case.
Thank you.
So we're doing some empirical work on trust, and just to the other side of Alpan's point is that trust and trust in digital technologies is an empirically determinable thing. So understanding how trust is formed, so like what you believe in, what you trust in, what system you trust in, depends on your gender, your age, your social location, the ways in which trust is instantiated is also very often networked. Sometimes it's not individual at all, which is I don't trust, but if a group of people trust, so it's networked. So being able to recognize that the notion of trust is not always the same, but is socially determined, is useful in advancing the conversation.
I'll I'll just take two examples again to explain my point. So one is Aadhaar, and other is DigiYatra, right? So that's latest technology, and it is not mandatory. We're not supposed to do it. But I feel lack of trust in the process. I mean, when I go to airport each time, I look at the two ways of going in. I prefer the manual thing. While I know that the collective conscience, everyone believe, and it is logical and makes sense to make it efficient to enter through DigiYatra. But I'm talking at that level, like psychological level, like there is definitely a lack of trust that always continues to define our relationship to technology, and rightly so. And therefore, I think information poverty, again, has to be addressed. And more conversations and critical conversations have to be held. Acha, okay. So I just took that example to explain the lack of trust. Yeah.
We have a couple of minutes left, and I actually wanted to ask all of you to, as we close off, in one sentence, what is either, and you can choose, what is either the biggest challenge you see for AI for social good, or what is the biggest opportunity? Who wants to start?
Biggest challenge I see for social good with AI is sustainability and scaling. Simply because it's a very iterative technology. Opportunities are unlimited. So.
I can try. I think one of the biggest challenges or opportunities, depending on how you look at it, is the ability of technology to go beyond what is expressed to more tacit forms of knowledge that often rest in social projects. And I think for AI to be able to intersect and interact and in some way take that to communities would be the problem or challenge for the future.
AI adoption is very important, but intelligence is divided at a large scale, not just human intelligence, but also social intelligence. So we have to factor in both of them when we are designing AI, when we are thinking of implementation and what it means for people and communities. Yes, I think, yeah.
I don't know how to answer this in a way which is neat.
You can be messy. It's okay.
I think the biggest challenge for AI adoption is just going back to what I said earlier, is that knowing how to consciously use it in a way which improves life for the person who's the most disadvantaged in our society, not for the people who have the ability to do it. And that's the challenge, and that's also the opportunity. Because we fail to learn from the past. We fail to learn from basic things like teleconnectivity even today. For instance, in a city like Delhi, and I'm very fond of this statistic, there are about 2.7 to 2.8 connections per person. Does that mean every person has a connection? No. Who has the connection? Government, I think so, does that, NSSO, National Family Health Survey, men, upper caste, higher socioeconomic groups, okay? And usually blue-collar workers, they have one smartphone which is shared amongst 4 people or 5 people, depending on the family unit. So I think the biggest challenge and opportunity for AI when we think about social good is how it works for the person who is the most disadvantaged and the risk which comes to it. So the challenge and the opportunity builds a risk. So I'm actually sorry to say I'm not too fond of scale. Because scale is an aggregation of numbers and factors within it, a certain amount of percentage or number, numerical value within it, where there is a tolerance limit in any system, right? And these usually happen to be people who carry that cost, who are people who fall outside it. And your examples actually were correct. Aadhaar, even though if you look at the National Economic Survey, and this is nudge, so going back to behavioral economics, the nudge theory goes towards coercion. And Aadhaar, let us accept it, was a coercive use of state power towards its application. Digi Yatra also, due to its ownership framework in which the airports itself use it, is that there's a lack of proper consent. And this is with air travelers, the top 5% of our economy. There's a lack of notice consent. Now, your first example, in fact, is the best. It's not only the tolerance limit when you click a picture of a Narega worker or the server not uploading, which is a technical problem. In fact, most workers, when they interacted with the Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan, which actually did a protest around this attendance system, was it robs people of their dignity. Women need to be photographed, and that needs to be uploaded. That's not biometric verification per se. Okay? So, according to me, technology has this ability, when we try to scale it and numerically cram it within a bureaucratic system of a dashboard of numbers, of looking at the safeguards and risks as an afterthought. Because the principal aim is achieving adoption, achieving scale. And inherent to AI is its hunger for data to improve the model. So I'm not against AI. I think it has tremendous opportunity. But let us learn from the past of inequity and also that obsession with scale, what it does end up causing sometimes. Scale is inevitable, but it needs to be factored within scalable models that there is a cost to it.
Thanks, Alpan. Any last comments? Thank you so much, panelists, audience, for great questions. I think we've all understood a little bit more about AI today. I certainly have. And it gives us much potential to look at the work we do through a new lens and achieve our outcomes through it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mandira, and the panelists. I think I came in through a little bit of swap of people who introduced the panel. AI has been a thread of discussions that has been there, and there's no free lunch, so everything will come with challenges. And I think one of the good things that I've heard through the day is that we're all starting AI at a similar position, be it us or the beneficiary. Can we make it as inclusive as possible right now? And thank you for that session. May I request Shanu to just hand over the stools to the panelists, and a round of applause, please. So as always, we do have the feedback. The codes are there. So you can keep scanning the codes again and again. So if you have feedbacks inside about the session as well as any other parts, you can keep giving us the feedbacks and make us improve our charcha every time. Your feedback is very valuable to us. The next session here will be scaling through technology. It's a masterclass. It'll be a fireside chat with Kailash Nath, and that will start around 4:40.